don't have a camera.
Okay, well, there you go.
I can see one. Is it super? Do we need it or?
Yeah, that'd be great if you can get it. That'd be awesome.
Oh, cool. Are we recording video for this too?
Yes.
Hold on a second. I might. Right. I am going to restart Chrome and see if that makes it recognize my camera. So I'll be right back.
No problem. Ooh. Oh, that's a good one. Hello, hello, testing.
Okay. Ooh, awesome. Yay, I have a turn camera on button.
All right.
Turn some lights on too. Yay. All right. Sorry, that took a couple of tries. I don't know. There's something about like my camera and Chrome that just don't get along recently.
Not really.
I hope it just works.
Okay. Do you hear me just fine?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Let me make sure this has the right microphone on.
Okay.
Where are my settings?
You sound good.
Cool. That's good. Every once in a while, it changes the sound, like the microphone to be the camera, which is, not cool.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you sound a lot better now. I guess I was using your.
Yeah, I put it on this mic.
Okay.
He was using this guy.
Okay. Nice. Yeah, now you sound like you belong on the radio now.
Yeah.
It's just like, all right. Yeah, cool. Awesome. Well, thank you for taking time out of your day to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. We haven't chatted in such a long time. I was really happy that we're going to get this chance.
Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, I think not sure when the last time we talked was. So I think it was on your podcast. I don't know, maybe or maybe a conference or something. I don't know.
Yeah, or it might have just been like a non-podcast chat.
We just been a regular chat. We just like talk like people. I don't know.
That happens? What?
Yeah, I know exactly. Yeah, but yeah. So I saw you. This book's been out for a while. Designing interface animation, and you're currently doing a series of workshops for animation with Sarah Dresner. And so I was like, hey, you know what? I stink at animation. I should probably ask Val, like what her thoughts on animation are, and I do want to say, like, reading the book, like you do make the one parts of, like, I've written a few books. One of the parts I hate writing a book is the preface, and that's where you have to say, like, this is what this book is for. This is what this book is not, and so in that preface you say, like, but I do check them out because I know they're just the worst things to write sometimes, because it's just like, I really just get to the content, and if, like, because and both reasons why people write them, is just like, this book may not be for you, so that's why you write this preface with all these cool things saying, warning signs and polite invitation signs, to do it. And so one of the things you said, like, this book is kind of geared towards the web, but you can apply the theories to to anything that you want. So in that sense, it felt like just a general animation book in terms of, like, how does animation affect our lives, especially and it's with digital devices everywhere and apps, native apps. I think a lot more successful apps using animation, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the reason I wanted to do that too. Is it's not like, I mean, the web does have it's its own medium. It has special considerations. There's things we can do on the web that you can't do anywhere else. But, like, it's not like we invented animation.
Right.
Sorry if that ruins anyone's day. But I know, right?
Yeah.
But like you said, like, there's apps that have been doing it forever. Some of them doing it really well. Some of them doing it not so well. And, like, we should learn from their mistakes and/or successes.
Right. Yeah. And so one of the things I want to ask you, like you mentioned in your book, that animation has potential brain benefits. Like, can you talk about what those benefits are, and why would like, brain benefits? Like, yeah, sign me up. But like, what type of benefits do people get from animation?
Well, a lot of it comes from studies that were done on e-learning. Like, I would say back in the day, mostly because it was done probably like mid 80s to like early 2000s-ish, most of this. I feel like that's when e-learning was, like, not that it doesn't exist anymore, but that's when people were really researching it. And so a lot of these studies were done around, like, learning outcomes, which is different than what we're doing for the web, but also kind of the same, because, like, if you're making any kind of software, people do need to learn how to use it. You're just not testing them necessarily. But a lot of it has to do with, like, cognitive load things, where it's like one of the big ones is really that if you see something, like, move off screen or move onto the screen, you don't have to think about, like, where did that thing come from, or where did it just go? Like, just seeing that simple transition, and even if it's, like, it can be so simple of just, like, actually seeing it transition on, the fact that you see it move as opposed to having to keep track of it in your head just takes a lot out of, like, what you need to keep track of as the person using the thing. You can use that brain space for something more important, like, I don't know, whatever task you're actually working on, which probably isn't, like, tracking the interface. And it can be really great for creating this idea of, like, kind of a better sense of, like, orientation and spatial orientation, really. As we're dealing with all of these screens of different sizes, especially little ones, we can't necessarily fit all of the functionality onto one screen. I don't know if you ever tried to fit that all on one screen, but it's pretty hard. So like we know when we're designing it, like, oh, like the menu's off to the left and like the status bar is like up over here, like, the settings. And we can use transitions to help communicate where those things are, and kind of like transfer that same mental map to the person using our stuff as opposed to just for us. And I guess a third one that I really like is this idea of like, and we see it a lot on the web too, it's like this idea of animation helping with perceived performance. If you see something sooner, like we see all that skeleton content that kind of like pulses in and stuff like that, as opposed to like generic loaders, it seems like things are happening faster. In our minds, that happened more quickly. And we see it also with some like carefully or like cleverly designed loaders that like keep you focused on the progress of what's happening versus like how long you've been waiting. And there's some interesting things you can do there. It's like loading times it's a space of time, and animation needs time to like exist, because without time it wouldn't exist. So you kind of like put it in those gaps and it makes things feel like they're shorter, which I think is kind of neat because you didn't necessarily make it any faster.
Right. Yeah, like one example, would you say is the that Facebook content loading example, where like they just have gray bars and blocks just kind of like pulsating while you wait for content, right?
And that's like, it's like everywhere now. I think it's even on like, I've seen it like in clothes shopping sites. Like I'm pretty sure like the Gap has it, like Slack has it, like everyone's doing it.
Yeah, it's a good testament. Like this web development team uses Facebook too. So like,
I don't know if Facebook started it, but they definitely were the first one I noticed. So
yeah, they're the first ones I noticed too, and I felt like, and I stopped what I was doing. I tried to recreate a CodePen. It's like, oh, this is awesome. We just how he did it, and I just kind of recreated it, but yeah, so that I think that was awesome, because I think that kind of plays into the hands of like perceived speed, right?
Oh, and definitely.
So, right. So like you're talking about, like we have this moment till we have content that loads, has to be processed on the server on the back end, and as the browser needs time to render it, and so we have these simple just kind of did simple like changing colors of gray in there before the content loads, and so and man, and Facebook just they want your eyeballs.
It's like that first hint of content, and like you're like, oh, it's coming. I know it's coming, and like Facebook is not loading any faster. But
yeah, exactly.
I've never been like, wow, Facebook loaded fast today. That's never a thing I said. Ever said.
Yeah, like it's one of those things that keep me on using Facebook and not like get pissed off. Like I'll spending my life on Facebook. Is like, oh, Christopher, he spent half his life on Facebook. Like,
like, oh man.
So the benefits of like reducing cognitive load. I think you also mentioned like change blindness. I'm not sure you mentioned that earlier.
Yeah, that's. I mean, that happens to us all the time, right? Like we like to pretend we're focused on the task at hand, but mostly you're probably not. Yeah. So like making it more obvious what has changed on a page. Right. I was just buying concert tickets this morning. Worst form I've ever seen. And it was like one of those things where it was like, you have an error. And I'm like, where? I don't see any errors. What's wrong with you, form?
Oh, man. Yeah.
And like some simple design tactics could really fix that. Like you could use animation in that case for like making it obvious what's changed, where the errors are, all those things that like are so easy to miss. And when they're well designed, we don't really notice, right? But as soon as you have a terribly designed one, like my ticket form this morning, you're just like full of anger. Yeah. I'm so mad this morning. I just wanted some tickets.
Oh man, like yeah, I'm so upset with bad experiences like that. It hits me like to the core. I'm just like,
right.
Oh man.
But especially when it's like important things. Like I don't know about how stuff is in Austin, but I feel like all health insurance stuff is designed horribly. Anything like city related is just like terrible, and you're like, come on. This is like people's day-to-day lives. You can't design it good.
Yeah, well, it's also, I think there's this, there's still like, it's a lot better than it was before, but there's, I don't want to get into this black hole discussion, but developers versus designers, and UX is somewhere floating around, and when I first started out, it was like I would just run into programmers, not throwing all programmers underneath the bus, but some programmers that was just like, hey, if it works, it's done.
Yeah, whereas, that's good enough.
Yeah, whereas work with and on the same company, I talk to the designers like, why is my design in here? Like, well, yeah, we're working on it. Trying to merge the gap between, even the design is not great. Sometimes you have to take into consideration the usability of it. So it's, that's where UX comes in. And so,
Yeah.
but yeah, so there's whole things where like, but yeah, with forms though, it's like, and that forms just took the web off into a totally different direction. Because I'm a dinosaur, I could say that because we didn't have forms for a while. But is that before forms is like, and so like it's been 20 plus years that we have like CSS frameworks now and whatever. So there's no excuse to have a really bad
I
form.
know. It's like
But
you could have just bootstrapped this or something. Your form would be better already.
right. But yeah, I just hate those like I think it's also like companies have like you talk about utilities, like municipalities that have those forms. And I think they just like do a third party, like maybe their bank provides it, maybe that like the back end for it. And so and you get this form that takes even you're on desktop, it takes like half of your screen, like you can only see a portion of it,
Right.
and then you hit submit, and then like you hit submit. No, you hit submit, and then
Like
pile of
cement.
submit comes on top of you. And then you're like, oh, there's an error. Like, where? I have to scroll back, and it's like,
I swear some of these were just designed in like 1995 and never ever changed. That's like for some forms I run into, I feel like that's the only excuse they could possibly have.
Yeah, and they get some like Eddie Vedder singing too.
Yeah, it was the Pearl Jam soundtrack on the form that really gave it away.
Would you like some music while you fill this form? Like, okay, yeah. It's a MIDI clip too. That'd be great. Oh man. Okay. So back on track, but yeah. So but you also mentioned the phrase UI choreography. Sorry, choreography. Is that how you
choreography?
say it?
Yeah.
Or you say the choreography, like you have the O in there too, like the middle
yeah.
O. But yeah, can you explain what that means? Because I tried to grok what that meant, but I didn't really understand like what you meant. Like it's like just a dance of
kind of, yeah. I mean, it's really just the idea that like we don't, you rarely have a situation where you're only dealing with like one animation ever, right? Like if you have an entire site or entire application, there's probably more than one animation, and like they need to have something in common. Well, I mean, they don't need to have something in common, but the best design ones have shared factors between them, right? Like whether it's like similar easing or just like a similar feel to them or a similar style, or like maybe they all only like exist on or only move on like a horizontal axis or something. Like when you think of them as a whole and think about what you can reuse across them and kind of consciously decide that, you can create a much more like just like a cohesive system, like something that feels like it all belongs together. And it's really, sometimes it's a big challenge, especially if you have a big team. Like if just every single one of your developers can like make their own whatever animation whenever they want, like you could have like 50 fade ins or 50 slide ins, maybe not 50, but even like 5 fade ins or 5 slide ins would be probably a little weird. And like when you really kind of think of this sort of bigger picture choreography for your animations, like that can be one of those things, like the motion you use can be one of the things that makes your brand recognizable. Like if someone is filling out your not terribly designed form, but beautiful form, like on a desktop, and then they go fill out the rest of it like on their mobile device or something, there's only so many things that can be a common thread between all of these viewport sizes, and motion can really be one of them. Similar to how like type and color can carry across any screen size, it's like so can motion. And if you're really conscious about how you design it and keeping that kind of consistent feel or some sort of shared feel, it's like one more way to kind of instill that trust and confidence that like you are in the place you think you are. It's all good.
All right. Cool. Yeah. So I guess like you mentioned it, like I guess this consistency, like and like I guess static design, like print design, graphic design. It's like you definitely want consistency with your elements, with your type, with your your graphics that you have in there. And so
exactly.
I guess so what you're saying is like this is more like choreography is more like making sure when you do add animation elements and there's more than one, that they work in concert with.
Right.
with
Because
that.
no
So
matter
yes.
what, I mean, people using your stuff are going to see it as one thing. And like, if on one page you have animation that behaves one way, and then they go to like the next section and it all behaves a different way, they're going to be like, what just happened? Sort of like if you had an entirely different page layout, like on the next page of your site. Like there's definitely cases where that makes sense because maybe you are moving to like a different article or something. But like in many cases, you don't want that to be a drastic difference. And I think if you're not paying attention to it, it's really easy to like, end up with like 500 slide-ins, and those have just multiplied by factors of 10 every time I've mentioned them. But it's really easy for that to kind of get out of hand and not fit with the rest of your design. And it's just so much more effective when it is. So it's kind of one of those things where it's like, if you just give it a little bit of attention, you can have like really great benefits from it.
Cool. Yeah, definitely. You definitely don't go overboard on it, and you definitely want to keep an eye on it. And then you mentioned also blocking animation, and that's bad. Apparently, I just read that was bad. I didn't really understand the concept of what blocking is, and then of course non-blocking, the opposite, I guess, is good.
Yeah.
Could you explain that more? Explain that, like what is blocking animation, and
Right. So blocking animation is basically any animation that like blocks you from doing stuff while it's
okay,
animating. And it's like logically it's a really easy trap to fall in. It's
yeah,
basically like you hit a button to like maybe call in the next page, and essentially that site ignores any input you make until that page transition is done.
okay,
And like that page transition could take like an entire second, and it will ignore all of your clicks or anything you do. And you can just end up in some really weird situations. I've seen it a lot, less so now, but it used to be a thing I ran into a lot, especially with like accordions, where like there'd be an open button, right? And as soon as you clicked open, the open button would be disabled until the entire accordion opened. And so like if you wanted to close it again, you had to wait till it fully opened before you could hit close.
all right,
And it just feels so clunky, and like as the person using it, it usually feels broken. You're like, why can't I just click open and close over and over and just have it be like open, close, open, close? Like, why can't I do that? And it's a good question. You should be able to do that. But a lot of times, perhaps for like programming simplicity, sites don't always do that, and they kind of like turn off user input while they're animating, which is pretty much usually a bad idea. I mean, there's probably cases where it's not a terrible idea, but I feel like most things where if it's like a navigation or something like that, where there's potential for constant interaction, you need to allow that even if there is animation. Like no one should have to sit and wait for your transition before they can like do the next thing they're going to do. And I think that's like easier said than done. You're like, we won't make them wait. And then you're like, oh no, we'll just turn everything off while it transitions. It's cool. And you're like, no, not cool.
yeah, cool. Yeah. So it sounds like your like animations have a supportive role, but they also have a very important role too. Or at least they can have it, and so you want to make sure that. But it's sort of like you want to make a progressive, application, right? You want to so you have an application that works no matter what, in what environment. But if your browser can support animations, and then you don't want to make sure it like renders your app useless or whatever.
Yeah, definitely that too. I mean, it's like animated like micro interactions just have a different feel, right? When you add animation, it changes the feel of it, and you want to make sure you're making it feel better and or just as good, not making it worse. As with all design, hopefully you're not trying to make it worse.
Yeah, I think with one example that it's been a while since this hasn't been a thing, but like back in the day when DHTML was a thing, and it was a winter time, like you'd see like the snow, like someone have like little snow like layers, like because you have to do layers and you have to animate layers and
Yeah.
like that, and so then that would actually block form elements on the page. Like, oh, snow, get out of my way so I can type something.
Oh, that's
So
also like don't cover up things people need to interact with, and like don't move the things people need to interact with. I feel like that's one of the things that hopefully doesn't need to be said. Like, if there's a thing people need to click on, don't move it away from them.
Yeah, I think with floats kind of hopefully going away with Flexbox and CSS Grid, that we won't have that issue anymore. But like you still get that issue with, it's not an animation issue, but like you see like someone's layer like overlaps with a float, like content that you need to interact with, and you have to like go to Chrome Tools to hide that layer. Like, okay, go back later.
What are you doing? Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like, oh. It's like they go back to the whole thing of like, oh, I just feel so disgusted with her. UX. So,
Disgusted with everything. Ah.
yeah, yeah, it's amazing how this like computer can make me feel sometimes. Like doing the web.
That's true.
I just need to go outside, get some air.
The outside world. I hear it's still there.
So, what are some good examples for animation? So, like we talked about, like the importance of it. But if someone's like listening, like, hey, what are, and they're maybe they're thinking like, well, of course animation's cool, but it's not important, or like, what were some ideas where like or concepts that that you think kind of elevates a design, or you think that that's it, or it kind of like just elevates, or just succinctly communicates a brand, if you will.
Yeah. Well, for like brand communication is a big way, like just establishing that brand personality. We were talking about like UI or animation choreography before, and like that's that kind of idea. Like if you decide, hey, our brand is like, like a high energy, friendly brand, and you come up with what you feel like are good, kind of movements to or animations that will like embody that. Maybe they have like a little bit of an overshoot or something. Maybe they do a lot of like scaling up into view or something like that. Something that's kind of high energy and very like punchy. If you reuse those same kind of like slightly overshooting, little bit of punchy animation everywhere, like you can really establish like this is how your brand is in motion. And if that exists throughout your entire like application or site, like then it really becomes reinforced, and it can be pretty it can be very powerful and really kind of cement your brand personality. Just like, picking specific colors or certain typefaces will make your brand have a certain vibe. You can do the same thing with animation. On a more like kind of granular level, there's like kind of certain, I guess, UX-y things that animation can be particularly good at helping with. We talked a little bit about like the change.
Oh, sorry to stop you, but I got some static.
Oh,
just now from on your end, I think.
huh.
So. Yeah, so whenever you speak now, I hear this static coming through, and
Really?
it just picked up.
Weird.
Right,
I don't think anything changed here.
yeah.
Let me see. Everything? No. Huh? Let me make sure the microphone's still the same. Yes.
Is there like it sounds like just some interference? Is like some other device or something, or do you have a phone kick in or something, or?
No, it's been here the whole time. I can move it, but nothing happened with it. Sorry.
All right.
Is that any better?
No, it's still the same.
Huh.
Wow. yeah, it just starts kicking in. And is it me? I don't know.
That's weird.
Like you don't see. Yeah. So as soon as you start speaking, like the static comes flowing in. Do you want to just changing the mic and then changing it back, and or see if that happens, or
turning it off and on again? All right. Let's go to built-in microphone.
Okay, so now like this microphone is fine. I don't hear the static when you speak.
Okay.
Yeah. So then you can go back and see what happens.
Go back to the row. How's that one? Still
So far,
staticky?
nope. You're back.
Huh.
Yeah.
Not sure what that was.
I don't know either. That's crazy. So sorry to cut you off, but
that's okay.
You were really going on a great roll, and I was like, oh man, what's going on?
No, but like some more specific stuff would be things like a lot of it has to, I mean, a lot of them could be, or one of them could be rather like when you need to direct someone's attention to a specific thing. When like in that same change blindness stuff we were talking about before, and also that's like the spatial orientation stuff we were talking about before as well. Like if you have a lot of layers to your interface, whether it's like layers that are off screen or like depth layers, using those transitions to move between them is going to be so much more informative to the person, navigating those layers than having them just like randomly, like kind of like just jump cut up here, just like all of a sudden be there. So there's a lot of opportunities when things are transitioning, a lot of opportunities to like guide people's attention in certain places, and also to give them feedback. I think that's one we didn't talk about too much yet. We talked a little bit about it with a loading, but like letting people know, like if you think about a drag and drop animation, or drag and drop interaction rather, and how much animation could be involved in that to like help you see where you're allowed to drop things, help you see how like your whole layout will change based on where you might drop it. Like there's so much opportunity to kind of give people a preview of what's going to happen before they've actually done it, to kind of like give them those checks along the way of like, well, if you drop it here, all of your like new pages will be over here. Is that what you want? And makes it easier to follow along with these more complex tasks as we're doing them, as opposed to like you move it and then you're like, oh, I didn't want that, undo. You can make this make it more of like a fluid conversation between the user and the interface, which is always pretty fun when that happens.
Cool. And then is there like examples of sites that you think like they're just really awesome that for using animation? I just like.
Yeah, the folks at Stripe tend to do a really great job with all of their products, both like their main site. They do a really good job like designing that to have like a good brand and a good feel. And then Stripe Checkout does a really great job of, I mean, just using a lot of those, interactive or animating a lot of those interactions. Like if you go through any Stripe Checkout stuff, there is an animation on pretty much every interaction. And most of the time you don't even notice because it's just all such a fluidly designed experience. Like you don't even realize what's happening. So they're a really good example of that.
Yeah, I think they I definitely want to agree with you there because I felt like they entered a space that was kind of, I won't say like it's dominated by PayPal, but like PayPal like was really there. But they came in and said like, yeah, we're gonna do this, but we're gonna make it, friendlier for developers, but also they actually just focused a lot on that user experience on that checkout process. And it's, I don't think I've ever had, maybe I don't agree with like some of their wonky decisions, the animations style sometimes, especially in the first generation of their software. But they've really polished it out, and they stood out where like PayPal, the checkout process. I think PayPal's gotten a lot better since then, but their process, and also they've got like Venmo now, but they're going in other directions too. But I felt like they're really into kind of catching up with Stripe in terms of making their checkout a little more friendlier. So yeah.
PayPal's definitely done a lot of work to redesign since Stripe came out, which I don't know if it was because of Stripe or hopefully they're just going to do it anyways, because it was very like their design was so stagnant for so long. It was like going back in time for a while there. And like they've improved some of their animation as well, but it's still just not, it's not at that same level of polish. But you can just, the one thing I really like about Stripe, and I know it's true because I read some of their articles they posted about it, but they decided early on that like motion was one of the ways they were going to communicate like the sophistication, and like that was an important thing for them to get right for their interactions. So it's something they like worked on and discussed from the very beginning of their project. It wasn't like at the end they're like, oh, we didn't animate anything, throw some on top. And I mean, I don't know how PayPal approached their design, but the animations they have don't feel quite as integral to the design as Stripes do.
Yeah, and sophistication in animation, that's like sometimes you don't think about that, right? Like, so if you, especially if you grew up on like Looney Tunes, right? You're thinking like, oh, animation. Like, when I want animation into my web app or anything, that's like when I wanted, like, I don't want the coyote explosion. I know what the heck you're talking about. And
maybe you do. I don't know. It depends on your brand.
That'd be a great brand to have, like Warner Brothers.
So the anvil fall. That could be your
anvil.
page transition at all times.
Right. So, but when we call it like sophistication, I think that's exactly what they were going for. I think they achieved it very well in terms of, and especially when you're dealing with people's money, right, in transaction. Like, like you said, like,
you need that trust.
Yeah, trust, and that's a high level degree because, like, no, you have to, like, as you talked about, like, hey, the form just works, so be happy with it, type of mentality, right? And so then you say, like, well, we also need to make sure this animation works, and in all browsers, and making sure it works, which is crazy. So sometimes, so it's not just crazy; it's just like it's a little higher degree of difficulty to pull off, I think.
Yeah, especially when, like you said, like they're dealing with money and payment stuff. Like that's kind of a different bar than if like it was a contact form and things were a little wonky. You're like, whatever. I'm sure it still sent my email. But if it's taking your money, it better be solid.
Right. And then so thinking about sophistication, so it's like Stripe said like, hey, sophistication is really important to us because we want to portray that in our website. That goes to figure out like a guide for your brand, and your book actually talk about conducting like a motion audit and trying to and also just trying to figure out your design guide for brand. Can you just walk through like the kind of things that you need to do? Like say, hey, if for someone who's listening that maybe it's a personal website or they work for a team, like how would they go about thinking about instilling animation into their brand, into their app, and to their site?
Right. I mean, this tends to be a thing that I get hired a lot for by clients to help them out with. And usually it's a kind of a case where like maybe one team member or two team members have like realize that animation is something they should be paying more attention to. Like maybe they have a little bit of it in their product and they know it's not quite maybe where it should be. Maybe they could be using it more or could be using it better. So they bring me in to help them like kind of figure that out. So motion audits are a great way to figure out what you've already got going on. Really great for like established apps and things where you're like, okay, we have animation in places. Where is it and what is it doing? And you basically go through like all the pages or screens of your site or your app and look at what animation is there. I really like screen recording it so you can have a bunch of little video clips to play back later, especially if you have to like go log into a place and do a specific thing to get there. And then you kind of collect up all the animation that you have and kind of categorize it in like based on like what its purpose is. Like you might look at all your like fade ins, you might look at all like your entrances and exits. You might look at things that like, scale up or stretch or appear. And you can get a really great bird's eye view of like how many different ways you might be transitioning something onto the screen. Like maybe sometimes it comes from the bottom, sometimes it comes from the top, sometimes it bounces, other times it doesn't, and you can look at that and figure, kind of look at it from that kind of macro level and think like, all right, like, do we need 3 different or 4 different transition ins or, slide ins? Probably not. And then it's like, which ones work best for our brand? Like if our brand, is maybe a very serious product, like maybe it's like about investing or money, like, do we want to have bouncy animations? Is that our brand? Probably not. Maybe you want things that are a little bit more assertive and a little bit more sure or assuring. So maybe you want to get just these kind of like ease in out animations or at least things that don't like overshoot and bounce. You can kind of investigate what sort of easing and what sort of look to the animations fits your brand best. And then kind of once you have that more central idea or like that kind of like, the thing animation needs to be for your brand, you can go and, kind of consolidate all of those animations that you have already. Like maybe narrow it down to just one, slide in, make the easing something that represents your brand, pick the timing that works best for it. And then some things that have happened a lot for clients of mine, they're like, okay, so we have the way our modal animates in. Now that we have that, we can use that animation to figure out how our like tooltips or our like, whatever other things that people might call things that are almost modals but not quite. You can kind of build off of that as you go. And then you end up with like a really nice system of animation. Like what your brand, what you're animating. Usually when you're doing a motion audit, you find more opportunities where you're like, oh, we animate, like this page transition and this one, but then we don't animate these 5. And why aren't we? Like, there's just you can really consolidate your kind of intention and design behind animation by looking at what you've got and where there's opportunities to use it, more effectively or use it better, or maybe use it or completely cut it out depending on, what your goals are.
Cool. Yeah. So that sounds awesome. So basically almost like a content inventory, but just for promotion.
Yeah, basically it's pretty much, that's really what you want to know, right? It's like, we have like a team of 10 people that are all just, animating whatever. Yeah. What are we doing out there? It's hard to keep track of stuff.
Yeah, especially if you have like different frameworks and yeah, especially if you're like in a college or university. It's just to pull one example out because like university, like colleges, go from one college to another college, and like their website could be just totally a mess. And so,
but the politics behind fixing that might be more than you want to get into.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, as someone who's been on a team for that, I think that's
yeah.
Team meetings for that. I think that's I don't go down that rabbit hole. So one thing that we always do, like for the conferences that we have, and like it doesn't really matter if we were talking about animation or CSS or something like that, or it could be some new technology. And you mentioned this kind of briefly in passing, which I'm not really sure that there should be like a book or pamphlet or like maybe just God bless as a phrase for this, but or like best of luck. But the problem that I'm referring to is just like how to get buy-in for animation. Like, so you just say like, we, someone in a team or just wants to convince their boss, to convince their colleagues about using animation, but and they may be on board for animation, but not using it in a smart way that enhances the brand. Like, how would you recommend for someone like that trying to convince their higher ups for that?
Oh yeah, that's definitely a common problem or a
Mhm.
common situation. I
Yeah.
think depending on how far out they are from like what, on the range of like animation is terrible and always sucks to like, well, maybe if we had a good reason, depending on where in that spectrum you are, um, I find that like, if you just really feel like you need to just even get your team thinking about animation, doing things like, even if you wanted to have like lunch and learns or something, like just kind of educating people on animation. Sometimes it's even just like, hey, did you see like how PayPal now animates this thing? That's interesting that they did that. Or especially like if you have competitors that are using animation well, it's always a killer example. If you're like, oh wow, competitor X is doing a really beautifully animated accordion. What are we doing? Nothing. Um, but especially if you can figure out or kind of explain like why those animations are there. If we think about something like we were talking about Stripe, like they have a really great set of animations for showing where errors are. Bringing that to your team at whatever opportunities you have to share things of like, hey, look how Stripe handles these errors. They animate this shake animation or they use arrows. Like that seems like a really good way to call attention to arrows, really focusing on that purpose. And then when it comes to using it in your own work too, you can have that same thing. Like when you have design presentations and you're talking about like a static layout, why not also talk about motion? And it's really that same kind of goals, like tying it to some kind of business goal or UX goal of like, by transitioning this modal in, we know where it comes from, and that's going to make it easier for the user to understand what happened. Like that's tough to argue against versus I just like how this looks. And also, if there's certain business goals about like, hey, we need to get more people to sign up, we need to make our form easier to use, you could come up with ideas of how motion can make that form easier to use. And a lot of the time, especially if motion is really new to your design process, the best way to get it done is to like just do it, like create a little prototype and be like, here's what our form could look like, if we had this stuff transition in as we went, as opposed to giving them this giant long page. Here's how this could look, here's why it's better. It kind of sections out the form, it makes things seem less intimidating, or whatever your reasons might be. Like it helps people track where they are, all those kinds of things. Being able to support why it improves the design, why it improves the experience is always a great way to support that. In the same way you would with other design choices. Like you wouldn't be like, I decided our navigation was going to be blue because I like blue.
Mm.
Like you'd be like, because it's a strong color and matches our brand guidelines or something, right?
Yeah.
And I think the trick is really just framing motion in the same way, framing animation in the same way you already frame other design tools and other design choices. And that just makes it feel more part of the process and feel more familiar. Like you can have a discussion about that. You can't really have a discussion about like, I don't like bounce. I mean, or at least not a productive one.
Yeah. It's like, I agree. I don't like bounce either.
You're like, cool. Wait, what did we just decide?
Yeah. so it sounds like because I talked to um, Brad Frost about this, and so like his book, he just like man, he's got a whole like almost chapter dedicated to like being that rebel and trying to convince bosses and stuff like that too.
Right.
So, but it sounds like with the same process is like his is like his mentality is like just go do it and ask for forgiveness. That's a big broad stroke of what he says, but
It's one chapter. It's one sentence. Geez, short
I know
book.
like well yeah, I'm a writer and an editor. That's amazing, but
Yeah.
so I'm
I
hire
think
me.
that the big thing behind all of that is just like if you can show someone how like
Right.
why it could work, show how it's a solution. Like the thing is, the first thing you may come up with might not be the best solution, and that's totally fine. It's just like a solution, and if you can show that, and you're all looking at the same thing, like it's much easier to think of it, to talk about it constructively as opposed to be like, nah, we don't have time for that. You're like, I just made time for it. Here's this thing that I think improves our design. Let's talk about it. Like that's a really, it's hard for that to just be like brushed off.
Right. Right. I think it's definitely showing examples beforehand or like trying to do like I heard that especially like lunch and learns where we try to like people give people great pizza and then it's not just pizza but great pizza so they show up and then
Yeah.
talk about the benefits of animation if you want to do that, but also I think I talked to Steve Krug about trying to convince people, and like the only way you convince upper management is if you just do a UX test in front of their face, and so it's like with someone who comes in and sees how animation. That's only, I don't think you get that far because I think everyone likes animation, but I think definitely also just doing UX testing to make sure your animations, or it doesn't have to be animation, but any design choice that you have would be best served like that way. So, but that's cool. But yeah, okay, cool. I'm gonna ask that. But so before we leave, I just also want to ask you, what is if I want to learn more about animation, I want to incorporate it into my design, where would I start? Is it still CSS, or do I do JavaScript, or is it a combination of the two? Because I know CSS is like, when I started learning CSS animation, it was like really tough. So,
well, depending on who you ask, I mean, the syntax is definitely a little bit weird. CSS does animation in its own way. When I don't think it's necessarily that terrible, but it was an adjustment if you're coming from something like After Effects or whatever. But I think CSS often can be the best place to start, because if you're doing anything on the web, there's a very slim chance you're not already using the CSS. It's not like you have to like pull in a CSS library or additional downloads. Like the tech argument for CSS is going to be a lot easier, because you're like, it's just there. Like you don't have to, lobby for like adding an extra library to your code base. You can just use CSS for things. I mean, CSS, obviously, there's things JavaScript that can do that CSS can't, but CSS is a really great place to start. You can get a lot done with it. And it's, you can take it as far as you need to. And I think that's a really great place to start from a technical standpoint. And also, a lot of the things you can do with CSS are those kind of, smaller micro interactions where like that might be the easiest place to start as well, as opposed to being like, let's animate everything. Maybe you're like, let's just animate this one form or this one user flow, or let's start animating just our onboarding. Like, I think CSS can be the best approach for that, at least as a starting point. And then if you make the case that you can improve things with CSS, and they're like, oh, we need to add more animation or do something that's more complex, then you can get to the topic of like, well, if you want to do that, we're going to have to decide on some JavaScript things. And I think that's going to be an easier discussion than just coming in being like, we need to like download all of Greensock. Like, I don't know, that's going to be a tough one.
So what does you mentioned Greensock, and that's like a JavaScript framework, I guess is how you say it. What does Greensock let you do that CSS can't let you do, or is that like how does that fit in? And then two-parter. It's like, so before, let's put a pin on that one. Let's go back to the CSS stuff. Like, if someone wants to learn about CSS animations and just wants, I guess, it's a good place to get their feet wet for animations, what would you recommend to someone listening to learn CSS animation? Like, where would you point them to, or what books?
I'll do total self-promotional thing. And I have a Lynda course on CSS animation that you could totally take. There's also some other related Lynda courses that work out well too. Dudley Story has a good book if you're more into books than like online courses. I believe it's called like CSS3 animation. It's like a black cover, and he covers some really great in-depth stuff there. I'm completely blanking on the real title, but I could describe the cover to you. Anyways, but yeah, those would be two good places.
A sign of a true designer right there.
Right. Like, it was black with yellow.
I know what you're talking about, man.
It was on Amazon.
Really? Oh, man. I saw books there too.
Yeah, like I saw books there, yeah. But CodePen's a great place for, you can just go and search for like all the pens tagged with CSS animation and see what you've got. There's just a huge variety of things, and the source code is right there. So you can just, fork it, pull it apart. And I feel like if you're into hands-on learning, that's a really great way to do it. It's just like poke around CodePen for a while.
Okay, cool. And then you talk about what JavaScript can't. What does JavaScript animation what can it do then CSS can't do?
I mean, there's a ton of overlap of things they can both do, right? Like, and I mean, if we can draw like crazy scenes with CSS, you can make CSS do almost anything if you really want to. But JavaScript, generally, the way I like to describe it is kind of like a continuum. Like you start with CSS, and then maybe once you have animations that are complex enough that you have like more than 3 things chained together, like CSS, you have to do that with like animation delays and durations, and that's a lot of numbers to keep track of. After you have like maybe 3 of those, that could become really difficult to edit. So moving to JavaScript, you'll have basically like more sophisticated logic to take care of that and like help you adjust these animations that are maybe more complex or have, you know, multiple animations working together. There's also obviously some like interactions that like you can't do without JavaScript. You know, like CSS knows about things like hover and active states and all of that. But if you need to get beyond that, you might need to bring JavaScript into the picture. Maybe not necessarily an animation library, but something. And then the other place that JavaScript libraries are really helpful for, especially ones like GreenSock, is animating SVG, because CSS can animate SVG, but there's only so much of SVG things are exposed to CSS, and JavaScript can dig into a lot more of them. And JavaScript is a little bit better, especially some animation libraries like GreenSock, at kind of like smoothing over the cross-browser issues with SVG. So it can really save you a lot of time and headaches for that kind of stuff.
Okay. And would GreenSock be the framework you would go to first and use? And that's kind of like industry level, like career, like that's what you'd use for like production?
Yeah, I mean, it's the one I tend to use the most, mostly because it's been it's been around for a while. There's a good community around it. It's pretty easy to like find information about and get help with. And also it just does a pretty darn amazing job performance-wise and with SVGs. And the backward browser support with GreenSock is pretty darn impressive. I think most of their stuff goes back to like IE6 or something, which, do you even remember IE6? So
I mean, the nightmares, yeah.
Still wake up with cold sweats. But I find it's just, it covers a lot of ground really well, and so I really like it for that.
Okay, cool, awesome. Do you cover that in your workshops?
I do. Yeah, we do. Our workshops are really like the workshops I've been doing with Sarah Drasner are. It's kind of a 2-day workshop. We go from like literally web animation 0 to web animation all the things. We cover everything from CSS to JavaScript. In day 1, we teach GreenSock because it would be mean to teach people more than one framework in 2 days. We even get into, and then like the second day, we really kind of focus in like on SVG and some of the other like more advanced things like using animation, React, and that kind of stuff. So it's like an all-encompassing 2-day web animation course. It's really fun.
Okay, cool. Then I do want to plug CSS DevConf, where you guys are going to be giving a workshop. And so, so you usually do a 2-day workshop, but what are you doing for the 1-day workshop? Right? What's going to be the focus for the 1 day? Because you only have 1 day. So.
Yeah, only half the time. I think the focus is going to be on, we're still going to start it with CSS and move on to JavaScript stuff. Mostly to give people that good spectrum of like, trying out the CSS way of doing things, trying out the JavaScript way of doing things. I think like trying those bits of hands-on things is the best way for you to decide when you want to use one or the other. Like having experience, even if it's just a couple hours of working with one versus the other, gives you such a better perspective than like any articles or anyone else's opinion. So I think that's going to be the big thing of like talking about getting things done with both CSS and JavaScript, what the differences are, and getting everyone to code some stuff so they can try it themselves too.
Oh, nice. Cool. Awesome. All right. I think that's a good starting point. Like, how can people find you on the internet and buy your books and all that stuff?
Yeah, I'm on the internets at valhead.com is my site. I'm VLH on Twitter. You can buy the book at designinginterfaceanimation.com or on Rosenfeld Media's site. And I also have a newsletter I send out every week called the UI Animation Newsletter. All about web animation things. Oh, thanks. I love meeting people that actually read it, because like you send out this email and people read it because you see the stats. I mean, you have your UX email newsletter, so but like you don't. It's just different when people are like, "Oh, I've read that." You're like, "Oh, there are real humans there."
Exactly, because like you work on it every week, and you're like, "Oh, I'll send it out, and maybe someone reads this." I know someone's opening it, but I don't know.
Right. But yeah. So I like to try to remind everyone of some good web animation tips, and just there's so many like great inspiring tutorials and like things being made. I think it helps to just kind of spur everyone on. Yeah. At least that's why I put it together. So.
Yeah, I wish I had the patience for animation, but so that's one of the things I love about reading animation, because in your work and Sarah's work on it, just because I feel like, wow, this is to see animation grow on the web since I've been as like a dinosaur on the web since the beginning, just to see it explore. And ever since Apple said like, oh, we're doing animation CSS, like that'll never happen. What are you talking about? But
Right.
it grows is pretty awesome. So,
No,
and
I'm really happy to see what people are doing with it. Like
mm,
I think as an industry, we're on a good track to do like good things and also really creative things with animation, which makes me really happy.
yeah, exactly. Cool. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
No problem.